Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Lymond Book Club. I'm Laura.
Hi, I'm Deanne.
I'm Philippe, and we're off to a great start.
We are reading The Disorderly Knights by Dorothy Dunnett, and we are on part 2, chapters 1 and 2. Dee will lead us through this discussion, but before we dive into the details, any initial thoughts you guys want to share on these 2 chapters?
I want to go to Malta right now. Can't, unfortunately, because nobody in America can go anywhere. But
For good reason.
would I like to go there as soon as I can? It sounds lovely.
Yes, I would also love to visit Malta. It sounds completely delightful.
Yes. Other than that, I don't really have too much to say about these chapters. I like them. A lot of new characters, a lot of new names. I'm not quite sure whether I can trust any of them yet or not. There doesn't seem to be a single person that I'm immediately like, this guy is going to be good or whatever. But, we're just learning about them for now. So,
yeah, that's my response as well. I had, especially meeting the knights in Malta, well, and Gabriel in particular, of course. He seems to be the sort of largest written figure in that chapter. I'm very much switching back and forth between this guy's going to be an uber villain or this guy's going to be like a super honorable hero, and I can't figure out, like, I've got multiple places where I was like, nope, bad guy. And then I'm like, oh no, maybe not. Maybe he's okay, So I just keep going back and forth. So, which I like a lot. I think that's great. Yeah, I think my initial impression is that I really like the fact that these are somewhat ambiguous characters, and I'm intrigued to see where all of this goes. Except for, of course, the leader of the Knights. He's horrible. So,
Mr. Dahomedes, yeah.
Yeah. Boy. So, yeah.
Yay. I am going to really hold my tongue because so much of what I want to say is spoilery. So we'll see how much I manage to contribute to this discussion. But I did go to Malta and I have photos to share later.
And I am very excited to see your photos of Malta. I've seen them before, but I feel like now they will be they're in context more. Because last time I saw Laura's photos of Malta, she was like, and here's this place. And I was kind of like, okay.
No, I had the book and I had a map and I was like, this happened here. I'm going to go here. I'm going to walk around. Oh my God, there's this thing from the book. It was great.
Are you showing them now or as we go?
I'll show them when we get to, I think it's chapter 2 where Lymond walks around. So I'll show them there.
Okay.
And before we start going over the chapters, I had a specific request for Laura.
Ooh.
I didn't want to Google anything about the Knights Hospitaller of St. John of Jerusalem, blah, blah, blah.
Hospitalier? Hospitalier? How do you say that? Do we know?
I think it's Hospitaller.
Hospitaller?
Oh, well, there you go. I didn't want to look them up because a lot of these people are real and I didn't want any spoilers. But can you either send us a link or suggest something that I can read about them that's spoiler free, just to learn about their hierarchy? Because there's so many different titles that I've never heard before, and other than Homedes, I don't really know like the hierarchy. And
what's a Grand Cross of Grace?
Yeah, right. If you could suggest something.
16-year-old kid seems to have a pretty what's up with that?
Queen Dowager's brother, probably.
Oh, yeah, Cardinal or whatever he is. Yeah.
If there's something about the order that's not spoilery that you can find, and if not, don't worry.
About reading, because the Wikipedia entry goes in order, chronological order. So I was thinking about reading the Wikipedia entry just up to the early 1500s, and then that would give the history of it, but then not be spoilery.
Let me go look. I think that's probably fine. You definitely don't want to read past the 1500s.
Right.
Because stuff's about to go down in Malta.
So. Even some of the place names are spoilery. I don't know how many. I'm not going to be able to avoid that, but.
Wow.
But yeah.
Modern place names.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is apparently a very important historical moment in Malta that we're about to read about. So
the other thing you'll see once you start Googling is the Great Siege of Malta, and then you'll get confused because this is not the Great Siege of Malta. This is the siege before the Great Siege of Malta.
Okay. Yes, Malta's very siege worthy.
It is. It's right in a very strategic position in the middle of the sea between Africa and Europe and Asia and Middle East.
Okay.
Well,
So
thank you
not the great
for
Malta.
doing that.
Super exciting. All right, let's dive into chapter 1.
Okay, so chapter 1, we open up with this conversation between 6 men, including Lymond, at the constable's home or constable's place, wherever he is. And I read this scene like 3 times trying to figure out who all these guys were. And just, okay, so we've got the constable who we've seen before. And we've got the Chevalier Nicholas Durand de Villegagnon, something like that, who we met in the previous section. We've got Piero Strozzi, who we also met in the previous section.
Yep.
We've got Leon Strozzi, who is the younger brother of Piero, right? So so Piero is a colonel of the infantry for France. Leon Strozzi is the commander of the French Mediterranean fleet, but he's also in the order.
He's in the order, yeah.
Okay. And then Francis of Lorraine, who's the grand prior of the order and this brother of the Dowager Queen of Scotland. And Durand is a knight of the order.
Yes.
Did I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay, like I wrote this whole like notes about, okay, who's in the order, who's not in the order. So is Piero not in the order or in the
only Leone Strozzi is. Piero is not.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I just
Piero is a Marshal of France.
Okay.
Probably you can't be in the order and be Marshal of France. I don't know. Maybe you can. Yeah.
They seem to have conflicting loyalties. Like everyone seems to have conflicting loyalties.
Well, and Francis of Lorraine is like very lost and probably screwing his own side with this whole thing.
And super young too, right? He's only 16 years old.
16.
Yeah.
So like
who knows how young
Lymond
he is.
maybe when everything started. Who knows?
Yeah, like
Maybe.
who knows? Okay. I'm still thinking Lymond was like 12 at that major battle where the Scottish Queen died or something. Okay. So back to this conversation. I love this beginning where these guys are talking about Lymond before he gets there. And so I'll just kind of summarize and then we can just chat about whatever you think was important. They sort of have this conversation about Lymond and then he shows up. And then they're kind of talking about the Turks are going to invade and they've got to go warn the Knights of Malta. So they want Lymond to go with them. And the reason they want Lymond to go with them is because he's a huge problem that they just want to like shuffle him off to Malta so that he doesn't cause political problems for people in France and Scotland, which of course he's well aware of what's going on. He has his own reasons for going to Malta. So I thought we could just talk about like whatever parts of this conversation that you think are relevant or interesting.
Sure. I mean, I made some notes. So one of them was I really enjoy the description of Lymond as a slender, wheaten-haired foreigner in virginal velvet with an affable expression, because we know that Lymond is neither virginal nor particularly affable.
Right.
But he's given like the impression he's giving in this book is very different from Towdy Boy, for example, and it's even different than like the Ice Cold for Vassal. It's
Right.
this very sort of like blankly polite version of himself, and so I find this really enjoyable throughout this whole section because like you as the reader are like, what is really going on with him? What is he really thinking? And he's presenting this affable, self that we know there's more going on.
Yeah. When did Queen's Play end?
This is like directly at the end of Queen's Play.
Was it like June of 1551 or something when it ended? Or
I think it was. Yeah, it was June. Yeah. And this starts in June, so it's literally like directly following.
He's directly coming off of being Vervassal, which the constable is well aware of.
Oh yeah.
So Yeah. So
He
that's
hasn't had a chance to go back to Scotland or anything. He's still in France.
no. Yeah.
And it's interesting that the constable is participating in this scheme to send him away, because the constable with the queen also were the ones who got him elevated to be a count. So they like elevated him to get like try to get his loyalty toward them, but they're also like he's still too useful to the De Guises, so like let's get him out of here.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me how like they see his value better than Marie de Guise did. Like they're sort of like, we've got to get him out of here because he could be used by the De Guises so effectively. And yet she was completely ineffective in how she used him. And, you know, it's like if she had valued him and had really brought him into her circle, he wouldn't go to Malta. Like he would not be in this conversation. And yet it's because she didn't want to do that he's free to sort of.
Well, okay.
And you also see towards the end how furious she gets when he tells her he's leaving. She's like, what am I supposed to tell Mary Queen of Scots? Like, how are you going to explain this to her?
Well, and he's got like the best rejoinder ever, which is basically like ask your brother.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things like at the bottom of 54, the younger brother, so Leone.
I think it's Leone, but some people say it Leon.
So first of all, I love that he's got a gold ring in his ear, which I just thought was a fun detail. But he makes this really like thoughtless comment about Lymond's time as a slave, as a galley slave. And yet I asked myself, like, was it thoughtless? Was it a thoughtless comment or was it a cruel comment? Like, we don't know enough about this particular character. And I don't know if he's going to be an important character at this point because I just don't know. But I was like, well, is he being thoughtlessly cruel or was he being intentionally cruel and like picking at Lymond? And
also it's the first time he's met him, so maybe he's feeling him out to see if he can get like emotional reaction out of him.
Yeah. And the constable tries to kind of soothe Lymond's pride or whatever, you know.
Yeah, because he wants him to go to Malta.
Like trying to keep him on his side. So anyway, then we get Francis of Lorraine at 16. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they gave power to very young people.
There's a line about how this is an age where nepotism was not only accepted but expected.
Yeah, I like that line.
Right. And I love the way Lymond treated him. Like when he made this very teenager comment about he says like Lymond talks about having this cordial encounter with this
Dragut.
Yeah, Dragut. And Francis makes this very teenager comment of like, I doubt any member of my order would call a murdering Turkish corsair cordial, you know, and Lymond just gives this very, he says gently says like, but I am not a member of your order, you know, and so he kind of cuts him down a little bit, but doesn't do it in a way that's like mean to the teenage kid.
It makes me wonder how much Lymond and Dragut know each other. Because they mentioned that Dragut was also one of the galley slaves at the time. So, you know, they could have a friendship that we don't know about yet that might come into play later in the book.
Yeah, it's a wonderful line. He says, you know, we were in different boats, but on the same side, of course, as the Grand Prior will appreciate. And I like this, like, when you're a galley slave, it doesn't matter if you're French or Turkish, you're on the same side, which is the side of the slaves.
Which is, also the side of not getting the boat sunk that you're on, like no matter who's in charge of that boat. Which there is that offhand comment at the end of this section that we're reading that talks about all the ships are coming, and it's like listing off all the people who are coming, and among the people who are coming are enslaved Knights of Malta who are rowing the boats. And so it's like, yeah, it sort of puts everyone in this same Like there are Knights of Malta on Malta defending Malta, and there are Knights of Malta in the galley slaves in the galleys of these ships rowing. And you sort of get the feeling that it's capricious, like who became a slave and who didn't. You know, it's like who was unlucky to be in that one battle, and yeah. So
I think also this is like one of the first hints we get, and we get more later, of Lymond isn't buying into the religious fanaticism. And he sees Dragoon as a person, not as like he's my enemy because he worships Islam and he's represents hell. He's like, no, he's a person like me. We are on the same side. He has a very modern like perspective that is very out of place and out of time with where he is and what he's doing. And I find it really interesting how he like pokes at that, and you're not quite sure if maybe he's trolling to get a reaction or if this is what he truly believes.
So I think that is a fascinating comment about the way that religion is discussed. I'm super excited to see how Dunnett deals with religion in this book, just because I think there's also this undercurrent of the fanaticism is not about faith but power, and I think that's a huge thread. So just to be candid, like I am a person of faith for people who watch. So, but there's such a thread throughout the history of Christendom and Christianity of the power trumping faith when it comes to particularly these militaristic groups, and that these men who are on Malta, like linguistically they're talking about God. Like the rhetoric is all about God and about faith and about, you know, God is superior to, you know, like God Jehovah is superior to Allah or things like that. But what's really coming out, I think the undercurrent of it all is that this is a place of power that they're speaking from, and they don't want to lose the power that they have. And even the vows of poverty and chastity and all of that it's still about being special and different and having power in these ways. And I'm not saying that's true of every monastical order or anything like that, but I think Dunnett is definitely playing with those ideas with these characters. And
there's also a really interesting conflict of like, there's a conflict between the politics and the nation. Well, actually, there's a conflict between the nation state and religion as power centers, and the whole conflict that the French knights have is they're torn between the two. The
right.
loyalty to France as a nation versus the loyalty to, you know, the knights and therefore like their religion.
Well, and also like the state of Catholicism not as a group of people of faith, but as a group of people of like a nation state almost, you know, that there is like, particularly with the Vatican and the Pope and it's a seat of power, and it's a seat of governmental control. And, you know, Charles, like, you know, the Holy Roman Empire, and like how independent was he of the Pope, and, you know, all of that. So that idea of like, is the loyalty being evidenced here a loyalty to God, or is it a loyalty to an institution or a group of institutions? And
because like, yeah, similarly as the French knights are very attached to France, the Spanish knights is like, are they really doing the best decisions for the order as a religious order, or are they doing the best decisions for Charles, the Holy Roman Emperor?
yeah. Yeah.
And like you're saying, it's all about power. Like, who has the power? The nation states, which nation state, or the religious order, which, you know, which person within it, because they're all struggling.
And like, I would be interested to see Dunnett write a character who is like evidences sort of humility and self-sacrifice and like really following vows of poverty and chastity and humility and all of that for the sake of faith. But I have not seen evidence of that yet. So like maybe some of these characters are that, but they don't seem to be so far. There's a lot of like, we don't drink, nudge, nudge, want a glass of wine, and so it's like,
Right.
I
Devillian.
feel- Yeah, I feel if we're gonna get that, it's gonna be in this book somewhere. So,
Yeah.
but maybe not. We'll see.
I kind of hope there is, just as a nice contrast. I'd like to see a character who does have a strong center core of faith, but
I mean, I think so far she's really highlighting Gabriel as the one sort of the knights that may encompass these values the most. But he is willing to sort of turn an eye on certain things. So
yeah, I'm so suspicious of him. We'll talk about why later, but
So why do you guys think that Lymond agrees to go to Malta?
so I was really intrigued by his statement where he says, where is it? It's a little out of order to talk about it now, but I think it applies. Okay, so he says when he's talking to the pirate, like after they're on the boat, Thompson,
Yeah.
and he says, I want to fight in Malta. I want to meet a man named Gabriel. And if I leave Malta, it will be to go back to my own army in Scotland. And I kind of first read that as like a blow off comment, that he was just like, oh, I'm just doing this and blah, blah. And then I came back to it and I was kind of like, well, maybe this is part of what he's doing. Like he's intrigued by this Gabriel person. He perhaps is tracking down Una, to see. I think that's part of his reason.
yeah.
And I was intrigued by this throwaway, I'm going to go back to my own army in Scotland. I'm like, is he going to raise an army? That seems improbable, but also possible.
So also, if you look at 58, he says the same thing. This is when he's negotiating to go and he asks for a bunch of money. And it says, basically what they didn't know was that Lymond found out that morning that Una was on her way to Malta.
Right.
And that if Francis Crawford reached Malta, it was because he always meant to reach Malta, not to fight, but to recruit.
Yeah.
So I do think there's like, in the previous book, his realization that he can't ally himself to Marie de Guise or another person in power, like that he can't trust to do what's best for Scotland. And because he lost his title in Scotland, he needs some way to have an independent power base in Scotland so that he can do what he believes is right for Scotland, not what's right for the de Guise family or whoever else that he attaches himself to. So I think like this is he made the plan at the end of Queen's Play. I'm going to get my own power base, and now he's going to go recruit.
Which is interesting because if I remember correctly from the first part, like the Knights base in Scotland is really fragile right now. It's just 2 guys and one of them's pretty horrible or something. Like it was one guy and he's terrible. Like one of the guys is definitely terrible and it may only be him. And so this seems like a convoluted way to get an army to go all the way to Malta, but whatever. It could be that he sees a void where if he brought knights from the Order of St. John to Scotland, there would be a place for them because historically there was a place for them, but that place is basically empty right now, so he could fill it easily. Maybe that's, I don't know.
Well-trained soldiers and they're great seamen, so why not try to lure some over with you?
And they perhaps wouldn't be interested in overt political power, as if they may be interested in, subtle political power, but they're not probably going to become like the governor of Scotland or something because they're knights. So maybe.
Part of me wonders if he was actually thinking of Jarrett, who we meet later.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Maybe he was like, had positive memories of Jarrett as a capable fighter and who he liked, and was
because he clearly went looking for him.
Yeah, he totally
as soon as he could.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that makes sense. Clearly his plan was to go look for this guy as soon as he got in range of him. So yeah, that seems reasonable.
Also, why is he going after Una? She made it pretty clear she's not interested.
I think there's something we don't know yet. So,
Well, but I think also, well, go ahead. What do you think we don't know yet?
well, I don't know because we don't know it yet.
Okay.
I'm a little suspicious as just these things being the reason that he went to Malta, knowing that there's a battle coming, that his life was on the line. I mean, Lymond is a pretty honorable guy and would kind of make that decision, but I don't think what's there is quite enough for him yet.
Yeah.
So I think there's stuff that we don't quite know about yet, and I don't know what it would be.
Think about what just happened to Robin Stewart. Could that?
But are we comparing Una and Robin Stewart? Because I think Una is much more capable than Robin, and I think Lymond is well aware of that.
But Lymond just found out the Turks are about to attack the place she's going, and she doesn't know that.
Yeah.
That's true.
Maybe.
And she's only going there because of her involvement with him. So I would bet you, and this isn't in the text, but I would bet you that he's going because he, he feels so bad about what happened to Robin, and now someone else who helped him is also going into danger because of him, and he wants to protect her. So that, like the whole lesson he learned from Robin is when someone helps you out, like you have a loyalty to them in return and you need to have their back.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know her relationship with the governor of Gozo and why she goes to him of all places.
Yeah.
I don't think that's at all on the table yet, but I'm sure we'll learn about it.
Yeah.
If that is Lymond's motivation for going to Malta, or part of his motivation for going to Malta, I like that. Like, I think that to me, because one of the things I said at the end of Queen's Play was that I wanted to see this failure with Robin evidenced in character growth in Lymond. So if that is part of his motivation for going to Malta, then I think that is like he's learned something from that situation with Robin. So I would like that if that's the okay, so
real quick, one more thing, and just wrapping up that section was that it made no odds to the order about why Lymond was going, and that it had got what it wanted and would have gotten what it wanted even if Lymond hadn't gone, because of Jolita being at in the care of Lord Coulter.
Mm-hmm.
What did you take that to mean?
Well, I take it to mean, so that's part. Okay, what page are we on?
That's 58.
So I was actually going to go back to an earlier point, which I will in a second. But yeah. Wait, where are we in 58?
That's like right at the end of 58, in the end of that section. So
okay. Oh, right.
Yeah, the last sentence.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued because when it says the order got what it wanted, that is a super interesting sentence, because who are we talking about? Like, as we look back on this sentence from later, like, I don't think they're talking about the Spanish, however you pronounce his name,
Diomedes. Homedes? I don't know.
Diomedes.
Yeah. He does not seem to be, at least from the way that he was described, caring so much about Gabriel's little sister Jolita, But so when it says the order got what it wanted, does that mean Gabriel got what he wanted? Does it mean a group of people within the order got what they wanted? Does it mean, is there a faction that's like the power, the actual power? So I'm intrigued with that in retrospect.
These are good questions. I mean, I think that there is definitely a hint, though, that they want to recruit him. So, like, he's going there to recruit for the private army. Yeah, but they're trying to lure him there to recruit him, and they've got Jolita as the backup plan to recruit him through whatever her methods are.
Through whatever, yeah. There was a couple of things I wanted to note in this section, though. So on 55, we get a little hint of Piero Strozzi, which I thought was interesting, where it says, he halfway down the page, it says he concealed his amusement and sat in a mood of silent anticipation. For this artistic performer clearly understood every nuance of his invitation to dine with the constable. And so it just gives this little picture of Piero as super observant, which I thought was interesting. He hasn't come back as a character yet, but we're super early in the book, so I'm curious to see if he shows up again later. And he seems to be much more observant and savvy than his brother.
Well, also, Dee, on page 58, there's more evidence. Only Piero Strozzi looked thoughtfully at the speaker, knowing that Francis Crawford was wealthy enough to need no bribing and sophisticated enough to find this kind of exercise mortally dull. So he's like the only one of this group of knights that we've met so far that's sort of, I kind of see him on the same level as Lymond. Like he takes all of this in and he still shows his amusement. He's not as painfully serious about it as de Villegagnon and some of the other knights can be. So I don't know. I like Piero Strozzi.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I think I like him too. And I do love the fact that Lymond's like, I'm going there anyway. I might as well make some bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like made it work to his advantage because, you know,
Yeah.
money's nice. He can use that in the future at some point. He already has enough of it, being the Comte de Sevigny, but
Well, when you're raising a private army, you gotta keep those people fed and armored and whatever.
Yeah. I mean, Lymond is well aware of the logistics of a whole bunch of men, like feeding and clothing and all that. So yeah,
he doesn't have to rob people for it anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No more outlaws.
Yeah. So it's also interesting that Lymond seems to have at least somewhat of a handle on the political situation in Malta. From the bottom of 61, he's like, he's promised me a sum of money, clearly illusory, for my service, it seems, against the Grand Master. He is hoping, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like there's this, he knows that there's this tension with the Grand Master and all of that. So
It isn't that illusory money from the constable and de Montmorency?
yeah.
I think Lymond gets the money though, right? He gets like a bag of money from Jared, maybe later.
Yeah, he does get money.
I don't think it's the same money though, is it?
I think it is. Why else would Jared get the money? Yeah, it was.
Is Jared getting money from the constable?
I don't know. Somebody paid him.
Somebody gave him some money.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the money from Constable from Anne is illusory. I think any money promised by the Knights of Malta would be illusory.
It's illusory, right?
Because it's non-existent.
Yeah, because their treasury is empty. Yeah, but my point is this idea that he's well aware that he's going to have to work against the leader of this group. That this does not seem to be a secret at all. But yeah, so.
Before we move on too far on 59, I just want to highlight his rebuttal to the Queen Dowager about how, he's standing shoulder to shoulder with the Grand Prior of France, meaning her brother, in supporting the Knights. And I just loved, it was a nasty hit, which being a Lymond, he did not particularly regret.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then even though, and I do love this, like, even though he's pretty sure that poor Francis is going to get it from his siblings.
Yeah. It's a learning experience. I mean,
It's
Lymond around 16 had some pretty tough learning experiences himself, so he doesn't have that much sympathy with this guy.
If he's older than 16.
You guys keep thinking he was 12, so.
No, I'm sure he's older than 16.
I mean, 10 years ago, he was 12. That's what I'm thinking. Like, I'm starting to think at this battle, which was what, 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I think they say 9.
9 years ago. Yeah, I'm thinking he's like 12 or 14 at the oldest.
I could see that because him and Jarrett Blythe talk about being together on the Battle of Solway Moss, and they said it says they've known each other for about 9 years. So,
yeah.
Okay. So, do you want to jump into
that age?
You what?
I said we're getting closer to his age.
You're zeroing in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we go then to the scene with the French ambassador. Did you want to summarize that, Dee?
Well, he's going to be giving, they just have this discussion about sort of what's the situation in Malta and what's the situation with with Spain, with Italy, with Malta, with the all of it, like the treasury is empty of the knights, and the ambassador is supposed to be bringing a whole bunch of gold with him, which
6 or 8 or 10 mule loads.
or 10, or like there's rumors of massive amounts of gold.
But he's bringing that gold to the Turks.
Right. He's bringing the gold to the Turks. So not to the Malta, to the Turks. But I just love the way that those, like, these rumors of the gold is doing this, and then there's sort of like, maybe delay the gold a little bit.
Well, I think that those rumors are basically why the pirate ship tries to attack them later.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
There's a really interesting line on 60 that I think really sums up the state of sort of Europe at this moment, and it's through the thought train of this what's his name, de Aramon?
Yeah.
Yes, the French ambassador to Turkey. So in all the world, after all, there are only 4 nations who mattered. France, with Scotland dragged at her heels. Charles V, head of the Holy Roman Empire, with Spain, Flanders, parts of Italy and Germany, and the Pope in his pocket. England with Ireland under her thumb, and the Sultan, who possessed Turkey, Hungary, Egypt already, and who wished to conquer the world. So it's like we've seen the situation really in the other 3, but like this is the first sort of book that's delving into whatever's happening in Turkey right now. So I just thought that was a nice little way to sum things up.
Yeah.
I also found his thought really interesting, which is that he had verified what no man in France would dare to confirm, that the Sultan of the Ottomans was a good deal more humane than any Christian prince he had discovered.
Yeah.
Quite a controversial thing to say, probably even now.
Right. I mean, that the whole concept, or the whole like desperate clinging to the idea that the people like me are the good people and the people not like me are the bad people, and that just seems to be the thread of history, right? That we are good and they are bad, and that anybody who comes up and says, wait a second, those people are also a we, and like anytime we start to say that it becomes controversial or dangerous in some situations. And
people think they need to cling to this idea of their own superiority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like Lymond kind of calls it on 61, where he's got this whole section that starts with "Dear Me," and he talks about how the order being incompetently, if not culpably, led, and given over to fighting for secular princes, blah blah blah, and where are all the 8 beatitudes and blah blah blah? Where are the crusaders of yesteryear? They sound just like the cares. So this idea that this is a pointless disagreement, like this is a pointless identity to like fight for and die for when you're just killing people because their religion is different than yours, just like the cares and the Scots battles in Scotland are pointless. Like you're on the same side, just stop killing each other.
Yeah, they bury each other and kill each other in turn. And that like people will just find these reasons to hate and subjugate other people that are so illusory, if we will. Like they're just so, they're based on nothing, or based on these things that are not actual differences, and crazy.
It's also just kind of going through things I highlighted. Right after that, right after Lymond gives a sort of negative take on the Knights, de Villegagnon says, "You're forgetting Gabriel, Reed Mallet, de Villavalette, Remegas." So he's got this this idea that because there's a few good men still with the Knights, that it redeems the like kind of pointless battles they're fighting.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. Is it true? Maybe not.
Yeah. And this idea that Lyman's so practical, he's so practical, and he just says, like, once you've been decimated by Drinkout, there'll be none of you at all. Why not let Tripoli go? He's just like, You can't save it. Just let it go. And it's such a practical answer. And the Baron just says, because the order holds Malta by virtue of her readiness to defend Tripoli. To give up Tripoli would displease the emperor indeed. And so it's just this, well, we're going to keep doing this hopeless thing, even though we know it's not going to work, because if we admit that it's not going to work, then we lose our identity as who we are. So we're willing to die for that, you know, and Lymond is just like, just let go of the city. Like, it's not gonna.
No, I mean, this, like, I loved Lymond before, but I think this book is what made me really, really love him, because like you said, he's just so relentlessly practical and logical. And, you know, there's all this grandiose, like, you know, we must battle the Turk. And he's just like no, like he's just so practical, and he just calls it like it is. And he's so honest, and he's so insightful, and like, he just doesn't buy into any of the bullshit. It's just great. I love him.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to reading more of this book. Okay, so then we get on the ship, and then we get on this boat that's going. This is where I had to start looking up maps. Like, wait, where are they? Okay, so they're sailing from Marseille, and they're going to Medina. Wait. Medina. Yeah. And I'm like, all right. So I just Googled maps to figure out where they were and where they were going.
Yeah, I kind of wish that there was a map of like Malta or at least the Mediterranean Sea instead of Scotland in the beginning of this book. But
I feel like we definitely have to be going back to Scotland at some point in this book, because why in the world was there a map of Scotland for that amount of things? So
is there was not a map of Malta, right?
It was just Scotland.
I feel like my other copy has a map of yeah, I feel like my other copy has a map of Malta.
I mean, unless it's one of those books that like there is a map of Malta coming up in a bit. Like maybe. Some books just post maps throughout instead of all up front, but I didn't see one.
So here, enjoy this.
Yay, Malta.
So this is driving directions. They take a boat. But yeah, there's Marseille. So I guess what did they go?
They had to have gone like around
through Gibraltar. No,
they left from Marseille.
Didn't they go over land to Marseille, or did they?
Okay, they must have gone over land.
They must have gone over land.
Yeah. So from Marseille to Messina. Where's Messina?
Messina is right at the tip of the boot.
Yeah, it's between Sicily and Italy.
Yeah, it's right at the tip of the boot.
So they go there, and then from there to Malta.
Yeah.
And there is Tripoli, so you can see how Malta was.
And Gozo is it part of Malta, or is it a separate?
Like a little island right next to it.
So this is like the main part of where they're at is like here, Birgu. But then there's like Malta is an archipelago. So there's 3 islands, this little one called Camino, and then Gozo.
And Camino is the one that they're saying is the island of Calypso.
No, that's Gozo.
Oh.
Gozo's the Isle of Calypso. I went there, and it is actually the Isle of Calypso. That's what they call it.
Oh, cool.
Oh, wow.
The siren.
But yeah, the main, so like, yeah, there's Fort St. Angelo. So this thing, Birgu, this is where like the main action is happening. The knights are like live here. And then this at the time, this spoilery named place called Valletta was a mountain.
Why is that spoilery?
I don't know. I'm not going to tell you unless you.
Okay. It's like it's not spoilery yet.
We don't know yet. So.
And then I guess the chain was.
Yeah, where's the chain?
I think it was here or maybe down here.
Well, that's Grand Harbor that they call, and then there's a creek somewhere that they always mention.
Yeah, which I was completely confused by the descriptions of that.
Yeah. Look, Auberge of France. These are like the houses of the knights. Mm. The knights Marguerite. St. Lawrence Church, where Lymond goes.
Right.
He's in praying.
And all the knights are there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm jumping ahead, but yeah.
I would imagine the chain would go across, the front up top here.
The harbor.
From like the Fort Ricasoli, that little dock there over. But I don't know. Maybe not.
Maybe. I'm intrigued about how it worked.
Well, they do say at one point that they could go to that other port and then drag the ships over, and then they would be behind
Yeah.
them, which
Like
is
if
a lot of work, but
drag their
ships and
munitions
cannon.
stuff up the mountain, and they could just bombard the Knights' castle or whatever, which seemed defensively problematic.
Mm.
So that was like a side note of the fact that they went to Messina.
Yeah, so, but we're on this boat, and then we have this wonderful pirate. This encounter was so delightful. Like, I would just like to see, I'm afraid that there's going to be a lot of dark things coming with it. Like, sieges tend to be bad. So I feel like there's going to be some sort of section of this book that's going to feel like Helm's Deep or something. And but this encounter was totally delightful with this like pirate with fake guns and
the fake guns is such a great like motif because it directly like is similar to the sheep and helmets and Lymond and drag, all the men in drag. So like Thompson the pirate is doing the same exact kind of trickery.
Right. And I love Lymond's just like shouting to the boat, you know, it's like, hey. So it was just a delightful scene and super fun. And
I think it's important that she keeps repeating these sort of like really intricate plans and ruses, because I think it's going to happen a lot more in order to successfully win this siege that's coming. Lymond's really going to have to pull out some intricate and interesting tricks.
Well, he's already mentioned like, hey, send a boat that the Turks can capture that has this false message that all these reinforcements are coming, and maybe he'll turn around, you know. And
I was going to point that one out too. Yep, that is exactly Lymond's style.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the and I'm gonna totally blank on the details, but the Allies dropped a corpse of someone before D-Day and had like false papers on this guy's body, and was a success. From what I understand, it was a successful sort of disinformation campaign, and that just feels very Lymond as well. Like he would do something like that very creative. We're going to mess up the enemy through disguise and disinformation and all of that.
Yep. There's also an interesting kind of in the scene with Thompson. Lymond is, in my opinion, he's acting. He's exaggerating. He's like playing up this very macho, masculine, jokey kind of character to like be on the same level as Thompson and like, you know, win the respect of this sea pirate by acting like a sea pirate. And in particular, they talk about this woman in a way that's kind of misogynist, and it's not how Lymond normally talks about women, but it's funny, and it's you would do with a sea pirate if you wanted him on your side, I guess.
Yeah, but there's also that moment where Thompson talks about how Francis Crawford and we learned our seamanship the hard way, chained to the same bench. So it's like there's a slight feeling that even though they're having this sort of over the top jovial encounter, that like the basis of the relationship is that they were slaves side by side, you know, and you just wonder how much of their, like they have a lot of shared trauma. And so how much of that sort of over the top, upbeat emotional encounter stuff is just a way to deal with that mutual trauma. And yeah,
very possible.
You gotta have the undercurrent of dark with this character. Also, I love that the pirates' main piracy he talks about is insurance fraud.
Oh, I know.
He and Cormac are like perpetrating this insurance fraud in the 1500s.
Well, in a story about bringing figs on Christmas Day, and like everybody knows he's a pirate, but they can't not buy the figs. It's Christmas Day.
Right.
They needed those figs.
We need the figs for our grandmas and our kids on Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just feel like the more things change, the more they stay the same, you know?
Yeah, oh yeah, with the insurance fraud, yeah.
Yeah.
There's also in all this, like, sort of like we've been talking about all these petty divisions that keep people apart and fight over nothing. There's also this great, like, there's this way that Thompson and Lymond are allied because of the suffering they had together. And there's also the fact that even though de Villiganyan was like a minute ago, like about to fight the pirates, they get introduced and they get on, you know, united in their devotion to chicanery at sea, clasped willing hands. Like, we like being pirates, so you know it's okay that we were on the opposite side. Second ago, you were about to attack us, but it's all good.
And there's this kind of this idea that like once you get introduced to someone and talk to them a little bit, you shake hands and part ways. Like it's not, you know, that it's not, they become people to each other instead of faceless opponents that you can fight. So yeah. And interestingly, you get this comment from Thompson about how if to learn the way of the sea, there's no better teacher than Malta. So just giving this idea that the men who are at Malta are, even though there's not very many of them, that they are experienced and competent and all of that, or at least they could be. So we will see.
I will also highlight just a line that I quite appreciated, which is when they talk about Cormac and Thompson says, I told him Una would be his death one day. And Lymond just says, unhappily, she was not.
Yeah. I feel like he's gonna come back around. Like, he keeps coming up in mention, and he wasn't actually that big a deal in Queen's Play. Like, he was just kind of a catalyst for some things, but wasn't actually a big character as part of the story. So I feel like we have not seen the last of him.
Yeah.
I was just looking for the line. I couldn't find it, but there's a moment where someone mentions Calypso, and Lymond and de Villiganyan, whatever, they both sort of took a moment to think of their own beauty. And I'm wondering who exactly Lymond was thinking about in this moment.
Oh, he's thinking about Una.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? No, I thought he was thinking about Margaret, because it's about luring people to their death. Like, isn't that the story they were thinking of someone who is beautiful and lures someone to their death? So I thought he was thinking about Margaret.
I think it's Una because she keeps getting compared to a sea goddess. She's on her way to Gozo, which is the island of Calypso, and he's going there chasing after her. So she's like the siren calling him to Gozo. You're right, it could maybe be Margaret in the sense of like luring him into badness, but I feel like it's Una because like I think Dunnett this whole time wrote Una for this Gozo thing because she's always been compared to a sea creature, and now she's going to Calypso's Isle and she is the siren luring Lymond there.
Yeah. That makes sense. I did love this little exchange between Thompson and Lymond though at the end where after Lymond says that thing about going back to bring back and like have an army in Scotland, and Thompson said, and your own ships, asked the pirate Thompson softly. If I had a captain who would accept my command. There was a long silence. Then, since we were galley slaves, no man has commanded me, said the man Thompson thoughtfully. So he's turned from the pirate Thompson to the man Thompson in like 3 lines. Said the man Thompson thoughtfully, but that's not to say I won't come to it yet. And so it was just this, I thought that was such a neat little exchange between them of Thompson basically saying like, I would be willing to be under your command, and without actually saying that out loud, but that
like maybe, but like it's possible.
Maybe. Yeah. So it's possible in the future. So
that door is not locked.
Yeah. So so they just seem to be feeling each other out a little bit, which
there's another one of these descriptions of Lymond right after the scene with Thompson where de Villiganyan is observing him and finds him sober, self-contained, less than talkative, and was reassured. Which again, this is not the Lymond that we're used to. It's not the glittering Vervassal either, but it's certainly not Tatty Boy.
Yeah. That's literally what I wrote in the margin, not Tatty Boy. Yeah, because it's just such an opposite description. But I think there's a bunch going on here in this section that just reminded me of what you said about so much of these stories is from perspectives other than Lymond. And so I think there's a lot going on where paying attention to whose mind we're in is super important.
Oh, yeah. In this book in particular, and in the first one too, I just love the way she uses point of view.
Yeah.
She gives him Lymond a lot of the point of view in this book so far. Like in the next section where he's walking around Burgu and Malta, I all of a sudden just realized, oh my God, this is Lymond's perspective.
Yeah.
Like we've had this for quite a bit so far in this book. It's like, that's new.
I think the reason she did that is because she wants us to know the like real situation on the ground without, like, she wants us to have a baseline understanding so we can see how wrong the Grand Master is. And it's by showing us like that through Lymond, because he's the one who really gets what's going on, that can like at least have that baseline. But yeah, you're right. It's rare to get in his head so much.
It's refreshing.
Yeah, it is nice.
I hope it sticks up.
So D, then we meet. Who do we meet? Who do we meet?
Jarrett Blythe of France, but originally of Scotland, apparently. And yeah, so this is just, there's so many things about Jarrett that I think are interesting, that she continues to bring up the fact that he is loyal to the memory of this girl who died the night before their wedding. Holy smoke. And that he wears her ring, and that he's not loyal to the order, he's loyal to the memory of this girl, which is super interesting. I'm intrigued about where that's going to go.
I was sort of convinced for a while that the girl was Eloise, until it literally gives her a name later, because when they first starts talking about it, they don't mention a lot of the details, just that he had a girl who's dead. And I was like, I wonder if it's Eloise.
Well, that is interesting. That didn't cross my mind, but that's an interesting, that would have been interesting.
Well, also because he knows Lymond, so it turns out her name's Elizabeth, which we'll find out later. But
yeah. I love this bit where it says Lymond, so they get a little description of Jarrett, and it says Lymond waited, unexpectedly patient, until the other man rose, genuflected and turned. The flood of candlelight did the rest. It's like just this cinematic like spotlight on Lymond. And yeah, and then his response of just, he said something like, Francis Crawford, you know, and
he darts forward and seizes his hands.
So excited to see him. And yeah. So
I just also want to comment on her descriptions of Jarrett, because they crack me up. She likes to linger on how super hot Jarrett is. And so just in this intro, we get his handsome black head, we get short, vivid, vital, and then on the next page, we get Blythe's magnificent eyes. So we know Lymond's gorgeous. Now we know Jarrett's gorgeous too. It just cracks me up.
I have a feeling Gabriel's gorgeous because his sister's like ridiculously gorgeous. So like, I'm also intrigued by the amount of description of how big men are in this book. Like the Nicholas Dermond is huge, apparently, like a mountain of a man. And she also describes Gabriel as just like inordinately large. Like everyone's just like incredibly big walking around.
But Jarrett is short.
But Jarrett is not. Jarrett is short.
But super hot, even
but super hot.
Hot and short.
Super hot.
Like my kind of man.
Yeah.
And then I think Lymond is like, because there's all this like fan debate about Lymond's height, but like clearly he's like medium height, not super tall, not super short, you know.
Yeah. He's like regular height.
Yeah. So what is you guys' like impressions of what role Jarrett is going to play in this story?
I'm almost pigeonholing him into the sort of Will Scott / Robin Stewart category, like another protege to be had, perhaps.
Well, I feel like he's playing that role to Gabriel. So like one of the things about perspective in this chapter that so fascinated me was, or in these two chapters, was Jarrett's perspective on Gabriel, which is just hero worship to the nth degree. I mean, the amount of, it's like he thinks he's a god. I mean, the descriptions that are in Jarrett's perspective of Gabriel are just so over the top. It's really the thing that makes me think that I'm not quite sure about Gabriel. Like, I don't know if I like him, and it's because of what he looks like in Jarrett's perspective, and it just makes me feel that Jarrett's perspective is super out of whack. So, yeah, that's.
So we have also our line here, Lymond finally tracked him down. So we know Lymond was looking for him. And like the first thing he does is he goes and finds Jarrett. So that's interesting. And then we get a hint here. It was 9 years since their last meeting. And they had been boys in Scotland then, although old enough to fight side by side for their country. So we get an idea that they're probably around the same age. And boys, but like how old boys? Like we don't know yet.
Yeah. So did they like go to war at 12? So Lymond's 21? Like,
Possible. I mean, boys, I would think old enough to fight would probably be anywhere between like 11 and maybe like 14. So
yeah.
Because anything after that, they wouldn't be boys. They would be considered men in that day and age. So
I don't know.
Well, teenagers at
I
least.
mean, if Francis is like the grand whatever at 16, then
that's nepotism.
True, but
I mean, I feel like it's like how you sort of casually, anecdotally talk about boys versus like what officially counts as an adult. You know, like you're officially an adult now when you're 18, but like I'm still gonna talk to anyone who's like 22 or younger. Like that's a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, also Julita is 16, right?
Yes, and we keep calling her a child.
And she keeps being referred to as a child. So, and maybe that's just the sexist thing of the culture of the day, but still, Agnes got married at 13 or 14 or whatever. So
there's also an interesting bit that Jarrett darts forward and seizes Lymond's hands, but he seizes the cool, relaxed hands. So like Lymond sought him out, but he kind of tells him his background again without detail. So he's not being super like, oh my God, my best friend Jarrett, I miss you so much. He's definitely keeping his distance here. So he's like sought him out, but he's this very kind of cold, as de Villiers described him, sober, self-contained, and less than talkative version of
right. Well, we get a sense of Jarrett's character. There's a little bit, I think, of a hint of Jarrett's character in the fact that his fiance dies the night before his wedding, and he goes off and joins the Knights of St. John and like keeps her ring on his finger and is like dedicated forever to the memory of this dead girl. And I'm like, so not practical. Like he's like the opposite of practical. And it just seems like ultra romantic, like ultra over the top, dramatic,
passionate,
you know, like sort of in love with being in love kind of thing, you know. And so this is what makes me not trust his perspective on Gabriel, is this like that's kind of a crazy thing to do. So yeah. So anyway.
Also interesting is like in their first conversation, Jarrett basically asks if Lymond is thinking about joining the Knights, and he's disappointed when Lymond, just kind of plays it vague and doesn't tell him anything. So he certainly has an interest in Lymond, but he also has this like already he's disappointed in Lymond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, and also he seems to not like Una, like, or at least he's kind of bitchy about her a little bit. He's like, well, when he talks about he talks about how she's living with the governor of Goza, and so Lymond says, valiantly vowed to obedience and chastity, she would find a special kind of amusement in that. So is the governor also a knight?
Yeah.
Okay. Will he be kind to her? It's a question, said Jarrett angrily, of whether she will be kind to him. It's just like, oh, okay.
He goes on this whole rant about how Islam is evil and we are the bulwark of Christendom.
Yeah. Also, this is right after asking Lymond if Una's his mistress, and I don't know.
It's quite ironic because Jarrett did all of this because of a woman he was in love with who died, and yet he is very judgmental about Lymond going to search for Una.
Yeah,
Um,
super judgmental.
I tend to think he's jealous, but who knows?
I mean, who isn't jealous of Lymond?
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know if
he's jealous of
Lymond he's jealous of.
right.
Yeah, and then Lymond makes this probably sarcastic comment about how because Jarrett's like got this passionate speech about how Christendom is, whatever, and he says like, if we fail, the sacred law of Islam will span the known world, as if this is like the culminating horrible fate that will descend on everyone, and Lymond's cold voice following was as refreshing as spray. And you will all become converts and go to the Musliman's paradise where the climax of love lasts for 10,000 years. Consider it, Brother Jarrett, if you dare. And so, like, Jarrett's just like so mad.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
Because, Jarrett's like, this is the end of the world. And Lymond's like, hey, we'll have like infinite orgasms. It'll be great.
I have it. So then we get this whole scene with the order's receiver, an Italian banker, and we find out that like they're not gonna get the help that they were hoping to get. Basically, like there's this they're not gonna leave, the leaders in charge, they're not gonna leave Sicily undefended. They're not going to be sending help to Malta, which is not a surprise, but a disappointment, I would imagine. So
we also have another of Jarrett's fiery, passionate moments where the receiver, I guess, agrees they're going to send 200 men, and Jarrett is like, under me. And he wins by sheer lung power. Under me, and if anyone objects, they can argue with steel. Yeah. He's like so over the top.
And I will fight you.
Chill, Jarrett. Chill out. It's okay.
Yeah. And also his voice is described at the top of the page as his hard young voice. So like Jarrett is still described as young, and he's written as pretty immature. So if he and Lymond are the same age, like it's just an interesting, because as as characters, you feel very different. Like I feel like Lymond is so much older than this kid. Like he's a kid, Jarrett, and yet that may not be the case,
Well, everyone has different levels of maturity, and Lymond has his melodrama. Let's not forget, he's gotten into some situations.
He has some moments.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Like I think his like extreme degree of intelligence makes him seem more mature than he is sometimes, because he does go off the rails.
Yeah, he makes some questionable decisions. Questionable. So they sort of argue with no result, and then they set out for the island fortress of Holy Church in the Middle Seas and destined prey of Drago. So we are definitely going to be besieged by the Turks.
Oh yeah,
it's coming. And then we get chapter 2, the tongue of Gabriel, and I'm like, is somebody going to be breathing fire? We don't know. So
figuratively.
Yeah. So here's where we get that. Oh, by the way, we get another hint that Lymond knows Dragout a little bit better than, or knows him better than perhaps the people around him think he does, because he's literally got the guy's voice in his head. Like he's talking about a quote that he heard him say. So he's clearly had some, at least conversations with him, if not some sort of relationship or connection or something. Yeah. And so
actually, while we're on the topic, enjoy this picture of the statue of him that's in Istanbul.
Oh,
Yeah.
I guess
Oh,
this is
wow.
like the best one. So this is like if you're on the water, you like go by and you can see it. This is like near the water.
cool.
And you
Oh.
can see he's got the worlds, which kind of
Yeah.
ties in with what we're hearing here about him, like, you know, fighting to take over the world for the Ottoman Empire.
He is very distinguished.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So then we had that little moment about Calypso that we mentioned earlier where Dermond, I'm just gonna call him Nicholas Dermond because I can't pronounce his name, the Chevalier, says, the Isle of Calypso, the long-haired enchantress, alluring Odysseus with her voice at the loom. That's why I thought it was Margaret, because it was that idea of like seducing someone.
Yeah, I can see it being either.
Yeah, and I just, well, Una, I mean, that's obviously part of her story. I just don't see her, like, she does get described with sea metaphors all the time, but I just don't see her as like a seductress. Like, she's so blunt, you know, and but
I don't necessarily think that this is like a completely true metaphor. This is like,
yeah,
you know, you take like this mythology and then you put real people in it and they're more complicated. Like, obviously, I think Una's a person and I like Una. I don't think that she's just a sea creature, enchantress, whatever. But I do think the metaphor here of like her going to Gozo and Lymond following her is like very solid.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I totally think you're right. So then I love they have a respectful silence to the shade of Calypso. So it's like they just have this quiet moment thinking about the ghost. So then they arrive at Malta. And so we have this whole section about the chain across the harbor and they arrive and then we meet Gabriel in like this hugely dramatic cinematic way where it, I mean the actions aren't very dramatic but this the way she describes it is just like, and so Lymond and Graham Reed Mallet met, you know, and you're like, whoa,
what does it mean?
Yeah, so that's what makes me think like this guy is either gonna be like, he's either gonna be like the, I don't know, Dr. Watson to Lyman Sherlock. Like he's either gonna be like his right-hand man, he's gonna be with him through adventures or something, or he's gonna be Moriarty and he's gonna be like this super villain and they're gonna be antagonists throughout like the rest of their lives or something. Like it's just so, it's like fate, like, and then they met.
And I noticed right away that except for Gabriel's size, they have the same features. They've both got this blonde hair or apricot hair in Gabriel's whatever, and these piercing blue eyes. So it's interesting to me that she gave them the same features.
Yeah, and they're constantly compared with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like we see later that they often have the same sort of thought processes as well. Like they think of these plans together, and like there's a moment in the church where they both go to open the door at the same time because they both
like
know
look at each other and
yeah, it's the best way to sort of handle the situation at hand.
Yeah. So clearly they've got like, they recognize something in the other, I think, even this early because of those moments, like they look at each other and do and know what the other one's gonna do, kind of thing. And so like I think Lyman recognizes in Gabriel someone like who's intelligent and capable and competent and all of that. And I wonder, with their descriptions being so similar, Gabriel being larger, like bigger, literally, I wonder if this is like the makings of a foil for Lyman, that he is going to be like a reflection or a dark reflection of Lyman. One of the reasons I think this might go dark is just because it seems it seems narratively wasteful to have two people so similar in the story, like on the same side. So I wonder if he's going to be not on the same side.
Well, and just
Oh, go ahead.
expectation wise, he and his sister are held up to like this high virtuous paragon, and like they're spoken about with such grace. So it would be really interesting for Dorothy Dunnett to sort of flip the script on that.
Yeah, I just feel like there's all this, like, they're so beautiful, they're so virtuous, they're so competent. I just feel like, no, they're going to be like scheming horrible people who are trying to do like horrible things. And like, just there's just going to be this like dark underbelly to all this beautiful, graceful, I don't know.
We can only have one beautiful, graceful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
Right.
And it's Lymond.
Lymond. Is it possible they could be like, he could be a challenge to Lymond, and they could be like antagonistic toward each other, but he may not be evil?
Yeah. So he could be more of a like good Jiminy Cricket character, like not in a cartoony way, but like in a voice that's reminds Lymond of like, here's the virtuous thing to do, or here's the right thing to do, and like, yeah, totally.
But if he is a villain, I think we're finally going to get our competent villain that we can hope.
That's what I want. I know. That's what I thought too. I agree with you. Yeah, I was like, as I was thinking about, well, what if he's a bad guy who's doing a really good job of looking like a good guy, like, and is super, super competent.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great story. So
I'm kind of
gonna be a little disappointed if he's not a bad guy.
I don't quite yet see how there could be a villain yet based on the situation. So we just have to see how the plot progresses. But like,
because I feel like the Grand Master is kind of written along the lines of what's his name from the last book?
Daubeny?
Daubeny. Like, he's just not subtle, he's just a horrible person, and he's written as a horrible person. Mm-hmm. And so he's an obstacle for sure. Like, he's definitely going to be an obstacle for the characters that they have to deal with. But I really hope that he's not the main villain of the book, because I'm really hoping for like the subtler, competent, genuinely frightening villain, which to me would be someone who is sort of like a Lucifer character, from classic biblical mythology, who's like beautiful but deceptive and power, that there's that evil looks beautiful, and that's one of the things that's frightening about it. So so we'll see.
There's a wonderful description here of Gabriel, his Viking dimensions, his radiance, his serenity, contrasted with the fauve, high-strung person of Francis Crawford. And I just love those like words to describe them both. I think it's also notable that we get de Villicanion's tension gone from his voice. Like, when Gabriel's there, suddenly
everybody's just like, oh, he's here.
Yeah, Gabriel's here. He'll take care of it. It'll be okay.
Yeah. And I wrote after the time, it's like, too much? Just like, why is everyone so relaxed? And then but seems a bit ominous. So I don't know.
Their very first exchange, a mock apologetic smile. I'm going to hold prayers for a moment, I'm afraid. It's our rather repetitive custom. So he's like, what did you take of that? Well,
it felt like this, hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, we got to do this thing, hang on. It was just almost like the drawing Lymond into his like confidence, like, here's this intimate sort of confidence, like, okay, sorry, we got to do this thing. We'll be right, we'll be right here.
And he also sends Lymond off. He gives Lymond, could you pacify the master for me? And thus released with courtesy from unnecessary commitment, Lymond can go.
Yeah. And he's just kind of taking charge, but in this kind of suave, slightly mocking way, which I don't know.
It's interesting that he's self-deprecating. Like, is that genuine? Is that just to be charming and like build relationships with people?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, if you look right after this, it says, grace, intelligence, humor, and great strength. These were the first impressions of Gabriel a stranger would receive. These and the beauty of his magnificent voice. And what I wrote was, this is the first impression, but not the last impression. So I'm intrigued by the fact that it's emphasized, like, the first impression you get of this guy is that he's fantastic. That his voice is beautiful, he's handsome, he's strong, he's graceful, he's intelligent, he has this lovely sense of humor, and yet that seems like a lot, and first impressions are often wrong. So
but I mean, even de Villegagnon and Jared, who've known him for a very long time, all look up to him and admire him.
Do we trust Jared's judgment? Villegagnon is a little bit, so that's the thing where I'm like, maybe he's a good guy, because he does genuinely do some things that I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe not, maybe he's a good guy. All through this chapter I was like, no, that's shady, and then like half a page later it would be like, oh no, that's really good. I just kept going through the whole chapter going, oh, shady, oh no, not shady at all. Like, shady,
the shade of it all.
Yeah. So I don't know.
There's a great line in here. Lymond recognized that de Villegagnon had not only the confidence of Gabriel's support, behind Gabriel he saw God.
Yeah.
So there's this, like, I mean, and it makes sense. There's this need for leaders. There's this need for someone to believe in. You got Dahomeydes, who's terrible, so you need someone to look up to. And Gabriel seems to be a good guy.
Yeah, and if God is behind, I mean, there's that faith that, if God is behind what we're doing, then there's a greater purpose in what's happening. Like, we're not throwing our lives away for nothing. We're not throwing our lives away on the petty whims of men that we don't respect. Like, there's more to it than that. And so sometimes I think there's this desperate belief, there's this desperate need to believe that, no, what we're doing is because it's what God wants us to do, and yeah. So
one other note, Dee, maybe in support of your theory, unique among the knights, Gabriel had a house to himself instead of sharing the communal life of the Langs.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Why would that be?
Like, how come he's got his own house? What's up with that?
I mean, maybe it's so special.
Yeah.
I know this is not quite a question about Gabriel, but a Lang is like the separation of like the countries the knights are from. Yeah,
so like all the French knights are together, all the Spanish knights are together, so they're with their people that speak the same language as them.
okay. And they call those Langs.
Yeah. All right.
Which, from the perspective of a teacher who teaches at a school where there's like 40 different languages spoken at my school, I can see that's a problem. Like, because of the way that they did that, they have then put these men into very distinct cliques of the French are all together, the Spanish are all together, the Italians are all together, that, and the English are together, what few of them are left. And so they haven't, like, within that greater group, they've got factions that are very, very strong because they've been segregated together. And if they hadn't done that, if they had forced them all to commingle throughout their entire existence on the island, I wonder what would have been different.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the reasons the Spanish knights have such sway.
Yeah.
Especially since Dahomeydes is Spanish descent.
Yeah.
So at the end of this section where we meet Gabriel, we end with, we also meet Nick Upton, who's the one English guy.
Yeah, poor Nick.
And he makes a comment about Lymond being there to give them the benefit of his experience, kind of like sarcastic. And then we have Gabriel. Again, the wise, disarming blue gaze scanned Lymond. I did not care to court his already well-founded contempt by expressing it, he said. But that, of course, has been all along in our minds. Shall we go ashore? And sparing Francis Crawford the need to reply, Gabriel turned and, moving lightly for all his great height, led the way on to the baked sandy clay of Virgo. What do you guys make of that exchange?
I mean, he seems to be doing a lot of things to curry favor with Lymond and to sort of show him that, like, I don't know how to describe this, but like, I don't want you to be buried in the details of what's going on here. Like, let me make this sort of, I get that he's trying to sort of ply him into the trade. Like, I'm not describing myself way, but it's like, it's almost like he's courting him to become a knight, I think. And this is his way of like being the easy open for it. He's, what's the word? I can't think of the word.
You used the word seduction when you said
Yeah.
De Villigandian was trying to seduce him.
Mm-hmm.
Gabriel seemed maybe is doing something similar.
Yeah, but there's a very specific word I'm looking for that has really bad connotation of like when a predator is going after a child.
Like
And he's
being like Machiavellian,
not Machiavellian, but he's
grooming him. Like that's
grooming. Yes, that's the word.
grooming. Yeah, he's grooming him.
It feels like he's grooming him. I mean,
I thought it felt kind of slightly mocking, like because he says he's got. I did not care to court his already well-founded contempt by expressing it, and it's like it's almost like he's making this assumption that Lymond is contemptuous of them, and which may be true, but it's like he's kind of mocking that potential for contempt at the same time. So yeah, I don't know, it didn't feel like a very genuine comment.
One of the interesting things is, Dunnett tends to leave things out. So Lymond hasn't said anything contemptuous.
Right.
He could, I guess, be making contemptuous faces or gestures or expressions with his body, but we keep being told how he's like, kind of presenting this blank face.
Yeah.
So it's maybe not quite clear to us what he's done to cause Gabriel to think that he has a well-founded contempt for the Knights.
Yeah, or is Gabriel trying to say like the Knights are, there is something of that is contemptuous about them? Because well-founded means like if he's contemptuous for a good reason. Yeah. And is this again this like self-deprecating, I don't know, trying to like head off at the pass Lymond's attitude about the Knights or something?
Right. And I mean, Gabriel's fully, I think, and we say later, like admitting how, screwed up things are. The Homedays won't fight. So he can't hide that the Knights are screwed up, but he does have this like, but we're going to fix it attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we get this scene where Lymond, he's walking around Malta, which by the way, I loved the little description where she calls it the precious knot in the trade of the world.
Yeah, that whole paragraph on 80 is just beautiful.
It is. It really is. So Lymond is walking around and getting a sense of this place, and yeah.
So let me show you my photos.
Yeah. So let's see photos of Malta.
I almost feel like Dorothy Dunnett would have had a great second career as like a travel writer.
Oh man, yeah. Like I so want to go to Malta.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, I think that her books became an excuse for her to go places. Okay, so first of all, Malta. So if you go and you want to go to where this happens, it's here, Birgu. But the main part of Malta, like the tourist part that you go to now, is this place called Valletta, which is not in the book. It's in the book, it's just this mountain that's uninhabited. So
that's the mountain that they're saying that they're gonna drag the boats over or something, or the munitions over.
It's like Mount Gibberish or something with an S.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that mountain?
Yes, that's the mountain there.
Okay.
And then Fort St. Elmo's on the end of it. And then Fort St. Angelo is the one that's on the end of Birgu.
Okay.
So, so then if we go to, here's, this basically was somewhere around over here, this part of it. So it's, I guess, after the book. But I like this because it's a Spanish fort kind of design that reminds me of Puerto Rico. So this is, there just happened to be this like massive music festival randomly with the day that I arrived. And so it was super crowded and I was like, what is going on? So this is on, this is in Valletta, which is the main like really big fancy place. This is Valletta, so it's full of these beautiful buildings that look like this. Like the entire thing looks like this kind of architecture. But again, this is all post the book. I'm just showing it because if you ever go to Malta, this is like the first stuff you'll see. This is Valletta. This is a church in Valletta. And then here is the armor of someone who's in the book, who if you squint, you can read it, but you probably shouldn't because it's spoilery. But this is the actual armor of someone in the book.
Never mind.
Oops, don't read that. This is the like art. It's like an armor museum, I guess, or a Knights museum. So this is a whole bunch of armor from the Knights and like stuff from the Knights. The cross there, that's the Maltese cross. So when you see the references to the 8-pointed cross, that's the cross.
By the way, I loved the it made me wonder when it's called like the Maltese something. Is this the same Maltese whatever that the Maltese falcon is?
Yes, that is
Okay.
also the same Malta. Yep. Here's more old stuff from the Knights. These are old crosses. So here, okay, so this is when I took this little boat. It's like one guy rowing this boat and you get on the boat with him and he takes you. It's like a taxi boat. It was a little nerve-wracking. So that's where I was like over here somewhere and I took the boat over to here because I was like, oh, I want to go to the place in the book. And I realized that the place in the book is where no tourists go. It's not a touristy place anymore. It's Birgu. So I took the boat over. So this is this water you're seeing in the boat picture. Oops, ignore that. Okay. So here's the water. And then this is Fort St. Was it Elmo or Angelo? Fort St. Angelo. This is this. So I'm like rowing toward it. So you're seeing it. This. And then here's this. I'm like rowing up to it. And then there's the fort again.
Wait, is that what the fort would have looked like?
I think that's the original fort because the way she describes it is like very similar to what this looks like. The tiered windowless walls of Fort St. Angelo rising white from sea and rock on their left.
Yeah.
Right.
Looks like.
And then when I got closer, I like walked over to it and it's the Fort St. Angelo mansions now.
Oh, people live in it?
I guess.
Wow.
Wow.
No windows.
So yeah, that was a little interesting. And then so then there's these descriptions of like the narrow streets. Yeah, I saw a cat. And it is like all these little narrow streets like this, and balconies and cats, and it's very hot. And then here I was just randomly walking around all this area and I found the Church of St. Lawrence, which is where Lymond goes.
Right.
Although the one that's there now was built after the time of the book.
Okay.
And here's a picture of it.
Were you able to go in?
I couldn't go in, it was closed. I moved lunch hour or something. And then I also here's a plaque about where people are buried in this siege as well as the Great Siege. So we're in the 1551. There was also the 1565. I will have more photos later that illustrate other things in later chapters, but I thought this would be a good starting point.
Nice.
Cool.
It's beautiful.
Now we get it sensitive.
And
What
the water
language do they speak there?
Oh, English. It's English. It's like well, it's independent, but it was English for a while. So they have like the English phone booths, and they have English food, and everybody speaks English. That's really weird.
That is very weird.
Yeah. So after the
I would have assumed Italian.
That's what I would have thought too.
Yeah. But the food was very similar to Italian. I mean, yeah. I was eating vegan food, so I only have a little bit of the local flavor, but I had good food there.
Very
But
cool.
no, it was great. And the water was like warm and swimmable, and there's no beaches. It's just like rocks, and you just like jump into the water and swim around and then climb back up. It was great.
That sounds great. I loved this description of the Christians who live on Malta, and how it says, a great church and a race of defenders had come to bless the peasants and noblemen of Malta who possessed a rock and the language Christ spoke, which makes me wonder, did they speak Aramaic in Malta? Like,
No, maybe.
because that's, I mean, Christ did not speak Latin. So, so bitterly silent, both about the privileges they had lost and the laws they were now to fulfill, the Maltese were apt to recall that the church was already theirs long before the knights came, and that before the knights came, they had no need of defenders. It's just like, oh.
Yeah, this is what I love about Dunnett. She sees the truth under the, mythology.
Yeah, it's like these guys are like, we're gonna come and defend you. And it's like, we didn't need you, and now we're dying.
Yeah. No one would attack us if you were not here.
Yeah, we were just a little island until you came.
But yeah, I mean, I think she does a good job also of highlighting the victims of all this political, fighting, and in the end, what happens is people suffer.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's like another reflection of the fate of Turkey map, and just it's the regular people who get caught up in the machinations of people seeking power. Yeah.
Also, I really enjoy in these sections, both when Lymond walks around and we see things through his eyes, and then also the thing about in the long journey from Marseille, Lymond had not wasted his time, so he already knows all the stuff to look for. He's so competent, you get why he's worth 20 men and will be paid accordingly. And the reason he's so valuable and everybody wants him is he thinks, like he can really think and like see through to what's really going on. And there's this great line, thinking, analyzing, ignoring his silk clothes and blah blah blah, is like it's like his brain that is the power behind him.
Yeah. And we get such a good picture of, in this very short section, we get such a good picture of why this is going to be incredibly difficult, with the like, there's no river, there's no wells, there's there's only one or two springs, there's spoonfuls of Sicilian topsoil. So they've imported their topsoil, which is obviously thin and unable to, so they import their food. They don't have, like, this is just not a place that is going to be able to sustain a siege for very long, because they're going to starve. And so we get a really good sense of that as Lymond is going around and thinking about all of this stuff in the town.
Yeah, and like they could have prepared if they had more warning, right, and if the Grandmaster was competent, but because he's not, like, they're gonna have to scramble at the last minute. And
if they had pre-prepared, knowing like, hey, maybe we're gonna get attacked on this very strategic spot that we're on with these very dramatic knights that have been pissing off the Turks. They could have prepared something useful and that would help them, but they didn't. So
imagine having a ruler that doesn't prepare for things that seem painfully obvious.
No, I wonder what that's like.
So alien.
Who has that? Who has leaders that are completely incompetent when dealing with crisis?
I do feel this book just gets more and more relevant.
No.
Okay.
There's a plague?
Wait, are we gonna have a plague? No. Let's not have a plague.
So there's also, it's interesting though that he intentionally leaves the hospital and the church for last, and so he does, like, he's very fair, despite Gabriel's thing about his contempt, some of which is deserved, but he also is very fair to the fact that they are helping lots of people. And there's a whole thing about how, there's Maltese and Moors, slaves and freemen, poor and rich, any faith and no faith, they're all being taken care of in the hospital. So there is a good thing about the Knights as well.
Yeah, and it seems like the credo of the Knights is that, like, if you show up looking for medical help, they will help you. Like
Mm-hmm.
no matter what you have or what your injury or illness is or who you are, you can come to this hospital, which
Whether you have insurance or not.
yeah, which is a really beautiful thing.
Better than now.
Yeah.
So again, we have Lymond marshaled dispassionately his information and his emotions on what he had seen. So he takes the emotions into account, but it's very intellectual, and like I love that word dispassionate. Like he's very different from Jarrett, who's so passionate, and he's very different from Gabriel, who's so driven by faith. Lymond is just like logic. I'm driven by logic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So then we get this exchange where again, it's like they keep assuming it, I can't tell if it's because they're all trying to recruit Lymond. So they keep saying things like the Chevalier here, he says, no, sorry, it's Gabriel who says it. He says it again. Okay, so he does this again where he says, you are to appear, blah, 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 to corroborate Monsieur de Villegagnon's report from France. You will see us, as I'm sure you would prefer, at our worst. Like he keeps making these assumptions about Lymond's attitude that may or may not be true, but are kind of presumptuous to make. So I don't know. Like, is he trying to like put Lymond off his guard and to say like, to get him to think like, oh no, you're not as bad as you're saying you are? Or is he trying to get under his skin? Or is he trying to seem like he's being genuine? Like, I can't tell.
It's also interesting, like even in the beginning when he kind of dismisses Lymond from the prayer, he is kind of making it clear that Lymond isn't one of the knights, right? Mm-hmm. We have this belief, you are critical and you are skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Lymond, yeah, and Lymond's response is like very, you know, I try to rely on not feelings but facts. Mm-hmm. So he's basically like, if you know, in a way, it's like if I were judging you, it's not emotions of contempt, it's just like literal observations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually before we move on from this, a little bit above it, we're in Lymond's head, and Philippe, you did a great job pointing out like how rare it is to be in Lymond's head. We get this thing from Lymond's point of view that I think is super, super important, where he's thinking about the Crusades and the cry being God desires it, and Lymond thinks, but which God? Francis Crawford, so again, this is like his true self. Francis Crawford inquired pensively of each silent street of closed doors. For if your Muslim is also devout and self-denying and loyal and fervent, courageous and tolerant, and believes that to dispatch a Christian in battle will send him straight to the red apple of paradise, then in the forthcoming attack, with no professional, no ideological flaw on both sides, sheer weight of numbers must tell. This is a super fair and modern and tolerant perspective on Islam from a person from like Western Europe or Scotland. Like even now this is just like super tolerant.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's so modern. It's like it's so tolerant to the point of like I'm like it felt a little anachronistic, but then I sort of was asking myself like, does it feel anachronistic because I am like I'm sort of giving like the arrogance of the modern age and assuming that people weren't tolerant in the 1500s, which I do not think is true. Like I think that people are the same, basically. Like, you know, just as we have like uber prejudice and uber like, you know, people who go off the deep end with religion today, we also have people who are tolerant. And I think that that's also true in the 1500s. So I kind of had to catch myself a little bit and say like, is my feeling of this being anachronistic is just me being like saying, well, the 2020 is, you know, way more advanced. Like maybe that's not true.
Yeah. No, I mean, there were definitely atheists back then, and there were definitely like humanism was a thing. Like, right. I think Lymond is obviously in the minority, but we see he bases his views on his observations. It's a very like early, you know, age of it's not the Age of Enlightenment, but it is the early Renaissance. It is like this era where like science is starting, and scientific method is starting to become a thing of like, you know, you don't just base your beliefs on like I believe it, but on observation and seeing reality. And Lymond is like really, really smart. And
I'm also curious, this is just dawning on me, but if how much exposure Lymond had to like Islamic and Arabic ideas about math and science, which were way advanced in a lot of ways, like particularly in math. So like depending on how much interaction he had with this, and maybe it was just this one particular Corsair, but if it was more than that, like how much experience has he had with
because there could have been other Turkish prisoners in the galleys. So he sees them as people, like Thompson is a person. They suffered together and endured this thing together, and they bonded in difficult circumstances together. So he's got a perspective that many other people would not have in his era also. So then there's a super interesting exchange with Gabriel that concludes this section. Do you want to talk about that, Dee?
Yeah, boy, I wrote a lot of notes. So it starts where he says, Gabriel says, like, you know, you'll see us, as I'm sure you would prefer, at our worst. And then that bit where Lymond comes back with, I rely on feelings, not facts. And then they have this, like, he talks about going to the church. He talks about surveying the entire place and the church and the hospital. And Gabriel's like, would you not mind being carried into either? He says, not with eternity in paradise assured for every Ottoman wound, which is a direct reflection. Like it's obvious, like he's just said in the same page, like right above, that's not, like he knows that that's not a real thing, or if they believe it, like the other side believes the same thing. So it's not, he's giving equal weight to the other side's ideas there. So so then Gabriel made this comment that I wanted to ask you about, where it says, someone entering the room fully at last and kneeling from habit before the old and much traveled shrine. So I thought it was interesting that it's like his physical genuflecting and his response to like the motions of his faith are habit, which I think is an interesting way to describe something that in some ways is supposed to be an act of faith or an act of genuine emotion, but for him is just habit. So I'm not sure if that was supposed to be pejorative, but it could have been.
Yeah, it could be. I think it's also like he does it. He's so faithful that he always does.
He always does it. Yeah. But here was my question, which it says, someone once called us mercenaries of the spirit. True, of course, but we are all in life risking one thing to gain another.
What page are you on?
Huh?
What page are you on?
83, the bottom of 83. Someone once called us mercenaries of the spirit. True, of course, but we are all in life risking one thing to gain another. Is it better to fight for vanity, ambition, money, revenge, pique? So first of all, those are all terrible reasons to fight. But also, I'm like, and I just wrote, aren't there better reasons? Like, so I'm just like, Gabriel, like, honor, love, defending the helpless. Like, there's lots of reasons to fight. But my question was like, what do you think he means when he says people call us mercenaries of the spirit?
Well, because they're fighting to convert, right? They're fighting to kill the enemies of their religion and or convert them. Wasn't that because they started with the Crusades, right? Go over there, convert, and take over.
We're gonna like convert. We're gonna like defend. Well, part of it too is like Jerusalem was this like, we're going to like wrest Jerusalem from the hands of the infidels, you know, with sort of the rallying cry of the Crusades. And they lost.
Yeah. But I mean, I think his whole argument is we're fighting for our religion because, you know, we're right and they're wrong, and they're going to hell and we're going to heaven, and we need to be saving as many souls as we can, and we're saving them. I don't know.
Right. But then he says, he's like, is it better to fight? So he's sort of like, yeah, we're doing this. We're sort of mercenaries of the spirit. Yeah, I think you're right. That's what, like, we're fighting to sort of these religious reasons. And he's like, is it any better? Is it better? Implication, is it any better to fight for vanity, ambition, money, revenge, peak? And so he's kind of implying like, well, if you're not fighting for these religious reasons, then that's why you're fighting.
That's who you're fighting, and we're better than that.
Yeah. And it's all these really negative things. And so again, it's just, I mean, it's him using this like rhetoric to sort of, I'm going to prove my point. But the reason he uses is not entirely valid because there are other reasons to fight that he doesn't mention.
Well, and I think actually, I think the next line answers your question about what mercenaries of the spirit mean, because Lymond says, would you fight to cleanse the Quran from the earth if the reward for death were the torments of hell? Meaning the implication is they're fighting to go to heaven. So that's that mercenaries of the spirit. They're fighting for a reward, and that reward is going to heaven. So just like mercenaries fight for money, they're fighting for their place in the afterlife.
Right. No, I get it. I mean, you answered my question about the mercenary of the spirit thing. Like, that makes sense. Yeah. But I was just saying that I don't think, like, I think Gabriel's trying to make a point.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And I just don't think, like, I'm wondering if he's supposed to be seen as like, if that's supposed to be convincing or not, because it seems deeply unconvincing.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think the next thing he says is maybe the most interesting, this little exchange where Gabriel says, I, said Gabriel at length, looking directly at Lymond, his eyes calm as a child's, have always sinned and never consequently deserved more than a hope of paradise. But if I had, and by fighting the Turk I must give it up, then my answer is yes. For those that follow me, that they might taste heaven, I would fight as I mean to fight, and suffer as I should be made to suffer. No man could do more. One man did not do as much, said Lymond tranquilly, and saw Gabriel's fair skin stained red from neck to brow. What do you guys make of that? Who's the one man?
I don't know. That's what I put on this. I put on the side. I was like, I don't quite get this comment. Like, obviously it completely pisses off Gabriel. So then my question was, is he saying that Gabriel didn't actually do any of this?
Jesus Christ is the one man.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Jesus was like, love your neighbor. He wasn't like, kill your enemies.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I think that's what I had assumed when I was reading it, but I wasn't sure if there was like some history we didn't know about. So
that's what I was assuming. I thought it was like there was some story about the Knights that Lymond was referring to. But of course, yeah. Maybe because that idea of suffering, like, that's such a part of like the rhetoric of Christ, is that he suffered. And so, but yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, because it's just, Gabriel has this completely, like, I am fighting for religion. Even if it means I went to hell, I would still do it because it's so important for my religion. And Lymond just basically is like, this isn't what your religion tells you to do.
Yeah.
And then, you know, de Villiers is like lividly outraged at Lymond. How dare you insult this wonderful man?
Yeah. And I like this mild surprise on his face. Lymond turned. And it's like this, it just intrigues me that these guys have such passionate devotion to Gabriel. Like, it's like, what is going on there? Like, why? I think that's a rhetorical question. I hope we will find out at some point. But like, what is it about him that is getting these men to just be like, how dare you insult this amazing man?
But also, I think, you know, at first, like, Gabriel talked about Lymond's contempt, and we were like, what contempt? He didn't say anything. But now he is starting to poke at him. Like, he said something intentionally hurtful to Gabriel.
Yeah. I mean, it seems it seems kind of reasonable. Like if Gabriel's gonna be like the contempt that you have, and Lyman's gonna be like, okay. I don't know.
Maybe it was a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Gabriel said he had contempt, so he starts acting that way.
Yeah.
And then his whole thing where he's always like calm and surprised is like, are you really surprised, Lyman?
Yeah, right. The mild surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So then we get into this scene with the Grandmaster, and this initial description of the Grandmaster is just great. I mean, it's first of all that he's so dismissive. I mean, just this, it's obvious to a child that this is nothing, but also the Grandmaster was saying without moving, without turning his thin neck, his thin temples, his thin nose, and eyeless socket clothed in a patch above the black and silver Aragonese beard. He's just like, oh, this is not good.
Yeah, he's just like a cackling supervillain. The funny thing about him is he reminds me so much of someone I work with, and like you would think that a person in that position of power couldn't be that clueless, but they can.
Yeah, they really can.
They really can.
Yeah, I mean, there's, it's just the truth is that competence does not necessarily float to the top when it comes to power.
I am no longer the least bit surprised by finding how inept somebody in a position of power is at all.
Not at all.
My naivete and innocence has flown out the window. So,
and this guy didn't even get elected; he just got appointed. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
But I love this way. So that you get this description of who he is. There's this whole paragraph of like very sort of not flowery, but elaborate description of who he is in this second paragraph on 85. And then it just ends with semicolon. And he was dangerous. So it's like this nice, like blunt bit at the end of the paragraph. It's like, just in case you missed it, this guy's terrible. But yeah. Yeah, so then we have the whole scene where they're just trying to convince him that it's a problem, and he absolutely refuses to listen to reason at all.
Yeah, I didn't highlight that much in this section because it's a lot of like logistics. The main thing that's interesting is the degree to which he's lying to himself in addition to lying to them. Like it suits him to believe this, and so he believes it.
He just doesn't want there to be a problem because he doesn't want to deal with the problem, so he refuses to admit there's a problem.
Yeah.
Boy, that doesn't sound like anybody we know.
No, not at all. It's interesting that he's not even listening to Gabriel, who seems to be like sort of the one knight that everybody sort of trusts implicitly, and sort of if he says something or if he's going to do something, that's the way we should go. But even Gabriel's pleas fall on deaf ears.
Because they're so factionalized, and Gabriel's with the French, therefore, Spanish aren't going to listen.
Yeah.
Not familiar at all.
The only thing I really underlined in this whole section was that part we've talked about before where Lyman's eyes met Gabriel's and both men moved not forward but back. And it was just one of those moments where I was like, oh, maybe they're going to be like a force that moves together. Like maybe
Which they totally could be.
Yeah,
that could happen.
Like maybe this is a sign that they're going to be, that Gabriel is going to be like the competent partner, like maybe even more than a Liamro. Like maybe he's going to be this person that sort of meets Lyman where he is in intelligence and competence, and challenges him to be more. Like that would be, yeah.
And I mean, in this Gabriel's whole speech here, even though he doesn't convince the Grand Master, like nothing would, everything he argues for is exactly what they need to do.
Yeah. Right. If the Grand Master was able to be convinced, Gabriel is convincing.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I think also is the role that, like, the thing that comes out is the role that Lyman plays in the scene, because the Grand Master makes that accusation against him, like, you brought this French spy, a spy of the De Guise, into our citadel.
And Lyman, like, it's so interesting that he he even uses that to be convincing. You know, he's sort of like, okay, if I'm a spy, then you know you should prepare. Just that whole like using the Grand Master's assumptions kind of against him, and clearly he's convinced the room. Like the room is pretty convinced,
but not the Spanish Knights.
Not the Spanish, but the Grand Master doesn't want to be. And I kind of wonder if even maybe some of the Spanish are, but
I think also like the idea that the Grand Master is trying to cover his ass by being like, okay, even if it is real, like it's going to be that guy's fault. That guy, you know, spied for them.
Yeah, well, and clearly one of the key things that set the Grand Master off was the accusation that he has embezzled money, which clearly he has.
Yeah.
And so like the money is missing. And one of the reasons he doesn't want to mount a defense is because he can't pay for it. And he can't pay for it because he stole the money. So.
Yep, and he doesn't want an accounting into where the money went.
Right.
So you were talking about that scene like where Lymond and Gabriel meet eyes and they're about to open the doors. And then I just love the way that like before Lymond can open the door, Jarrett like bursts through the door and he's like white with rage. And he's like, ah, you know, and then like he slowly realizes that he like stepped into a scene that's completely different than what he expected. And actually like they don't even, the Grand Master doesn't even believe anybody's coming and he just looks ridiculous.
Yeah. And then they were sent rabbits. Just like, oh, what a
well, not actual rabbits.
No. But I'm like, oh, what a sad way to talk about these young men and the shepherds and the.
Although had they been actually sent rabbits, I'm sure Lymond would have found something creative to do with them.
Yeah.
And helmets. Yeah. No, I mean, if he sent me into battle, I would be the same way. So I can't blame them.
No way. Yeah, no way. I have complete sympathy for these.
200 Calabrian men, shepherds, farmers,
boys.
Not battle sworn. They don't know what they're doing. So
yeah, so sad.
Then I also I just jumping ahead, I really like the way she uses the Grandmaster's title to demonstrate his complete failure to live up to what his title should mean. Where they're talking about, should we rescue the people of Gozo and send them to, you know, somewhere where they'll be safe? And he says, men fight better, I have found, said the Grand Master of the Noble Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Rhodes, and Malta, in the presence of their women and children. So he's going to let these people potentially die.
Yeah, die or be captured. And I mean, even the least thing would be like, send the women and children to safety. You know, like that would be the least thing they could do. And he refuses to do that. You know,
it's like criminal negligence.
Yeah.
Very, very clear. Anyway.
So sad. So then we get a slight glimpse of what is coming. Yeah. Which is almost just like a list of what is coming.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot.
Yeah, if we didn't know that the attack was definitely going to happen at this point, now it's all but confirmed. Not all but confirmed, it is confirmed.
Yeah, they're coming. Yeah, and they're very prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my goodness, it's just, yeah.
I think it's important she gives us this scene, like she gave us a scene from Lymond's point of view, so we know what's really going on. They are really unprepared, and the Turks really are coming for them.
And the Turks are very, very prepared.
Yeah. And it's like, it super like builds the tension in us. Like, we're not reading this going like, oh, maybe the Grandmaster's right. Like, no.
Yeah. I mean, like the contrast between Lymond walking around Malta and saying like, there's no well, there's no creek, there's no, like all of this. And then this, just this first paragraph of this little section where it's like, their cannonballs and powder and small arms, their stores of food, of water, of canvas and tents, their rolls of linen, their matches, and it just goes on. It's like they've got this and they got this and they got this. And I'm like, yeah.
We're not prepared and they are.
And it ends with, and the barrels filled with sweet grapes from Trevisan. So like, they're so incredibly prepared, they even brought dessert. It's like, okay.
Yeah. They brought coffee too. Coffee and dessert.
Coffee. I mean,
very important for a siege.
A battle without coffee. Like, this is essential. So then we are in we get Jarrett's perspective on his history with Lymond, which I think is super interesting. But it's not like, I just don't know how trustworthy it is, because again, like, we've got these narrators that are, you know, like, you never know what to think about their perspective. But the amount of hero worship that this guy has, and the amount of drama that he's clearly enamored with, makes me wonder. But he has several things that he says about Lymond. So the Battle of Solway Moss in 42, he says he allowed himself to be entertained, as had they all, by the kind of quick-witted fantasy which was Francis Crawford's trademark at the time. And so you just get a sense of Lymond as like telling a good story, and like being this I don't want to say class clown, because that sounds a little pejorative, but like the guy that you just watch and listen to, and is entertaining, and keeps your spirits up, and you know that.
Yep, 100%. And so you can see why Jarrett liked him.
Yeah, for sure. And then he says that in the messy rout of this battle, this tragic battle, Jarrett Blythe lost his father and saw Lymond, who had ridden and fought beside him with a kind of insane inspiration in the field, unlike anything Jarrett had seen before, removed a prisoner of the English to London. And yeah, so then he goes on to wonder, like, if this affinity he felt as a child would still be.
Yeah, he wondered now and then what the instant affinity had been that he had felt 9 years ago at Solway Moss, and whether, a man now instead of a boy, he would find it a childhood illusion. So I think there's a hint here of, like, he even had a crush on Lymond.
Mm-hmm.
You could read it as a romantic crush, or you could read it as like a hero worship crush.
Mm-hmm.
But there was definitely, like, 9 years ago, Lymond really made an impression on him, and he's been thinking about him, and he's really excited to see him again. And he doesn't know if he's going to live up to the fantasy. Yeah, and again, also, he wanted to find and give nostalgic credence to the attraction he remembered as a boy in Scotland. So these words like attraction, again, it definitely, there's a subtext of a crush here.
Mm-hmm.
Also, just I love from the moment that he hurled himself in a great blaze of anger onto Malta, because that's just Jarrett.
Yeah, with his 200 unfortunate shepherd boys. It's just like, oh. So they have this dinner, and it's interesting. So this dinner, which leads to this intense discussion, and Jarrett is watching Lymond, and he says, throughout the heat of the argument, Lymond had, Jarrett noted, restrained comment. It was, after all, the Order's own dirty linen which is being turned over. And it just made me think of Lymond sort of sitting back and watching, like, just how observant he is, and he's not in the thick of it. He's just observing around him, which
well, and like there's a very Will Scott moment from Jarrett in here. It says, hoping for some observable reaction, he was disappointed. Lymond, is similar to his head. So like we very much had these moments where Will didn't seem to think Lymond was human, and was like trying to figure out, is there a real person under there? Like, maybe if I poke him enough, he'll cry. And Jarrett is like thinking the same way.
Yeah. Also, he's totally disparaging of Una. He's like, over that island of Goza where that woman was, like, whoa.
He's jealous. I'm telling you, this is not a spoiler. This is interpretation. He's jealous.
Yeah. It's like, he certainly doesn't think very much of her, like, for sure. And it's like, or where where that woman was, or where he supposed she was, if the governor hadn't gotten tired of her. Like, ouch.
Yeah, Laura, I totally see it that way now. It's the jealousy.
Yeah, he doesn't even like Lymond anymore. But he's still jealous of Una.
I mean, an alternate, like, if we want to go, like, he has a man crush on Lymond, but not a romantic crush, you could even interpret it as, like, he thinks she's so beneath Lymond, and he's mad about her being there. But I don't think that's true. Like, I actually think I think you're right. I think he's jealous. But yeah, it's like she's sight unseen, right? He doesn't know her. He's
He
not
spoke to her once because he apparently was talking about Lymond and she heard and they had some interaction.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Boy, he's so contemptuous of her.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing you could say is like he really wants Lymond to join the Knights, and she's a obstacle to that.
Yeah. So then again, we get pictures of Lymond's just his practicality as they're talking about the fortifications of the island, and it said he talks about Lymond's. He says his grasp of the fortifications of Burgoo and St. Angelo was already uncomfortably accurate. So like he didn't know he knew the truth even if not the entire picture. And then Gabriel comes in also with a super practical comment, right? He comes in with this like he's kind of calming down. Like Nick gets defensive, and when Lymond like gives this sort of dry summary of what the situation is, Nick gets real defensive, and Gabriel's just like, it's nobody's fault but the Grand Master. We have to accept facts. It's too late to do these things. And so Gabriel's got this real practical. He's agreeing with Lymond about this practical assessment of their situation. So,
yeah, I mean, definitely Gabriel seems to, be the only other person here who's really like got that kind of cool collected ability to assess what's going on. And there's a great line or section of that's from, I guess, Jarrett's point of view. Plainer and plainer as the talks progressed was the Knight's vulnerability, and plainer the queer congruity between Gabriel and Lymond, not in style or in temperament, but in coolness and above all in a sense of balance, which is interesting because it describes them as similar, but then it goes on to talk about how Mallet, the older man with the piece of maturity within him, had a physical magnificence, blah, blah, blah. Beside him, they all looked pale, even, de Villiers, blah, blah, and Lymond, an ashen-haired, soft-voiced clerk, pattering solutions in court. So even though they're equals, he outshines all of them, even Lymond.
Yeah. Well, and it says, and in the midst of that, Jarrett talks about like his body is only a vessel for his own special brand of power. And it makes me wonder if Jarrett has gone from like hero worshiping Lymond at one point when he was a kid to like having this obsession with this girl who dies, sort of being like emotionally dramatic with Lymond, and then emotionally dramatic with this girl, and then now he's got this massive hero worship of Gabriel, and it's like whatever comes before pales because now he's ultra focused on this guy, and so he's the one. It's just so hero worship. So
there's also a great little bit, only there did Jarrett's newfound enigma fail him a little, for none of the crusading zeal clearly was in Lymond's blood, and he did nothing as Gabriel would have done to avoid giving hurt. So Jarrett is like a little bit open-minded to this, affection for Lymond, but Lymond's letting him down. Lymond's not as wonderful as Gabriel. Lymond is hurtful. He's not, a passionate leader the way that Gabriel is.
Yeah, and this picture of Gabriel as someone who's kind, like he avoids giving hurt, so someone who's like has care for the feelings of others is another one of those things that just made me think, well, like, okay, maybe this guy's like, maybe he's going to be a good guy, maybe he's going to be this like a foil in a way that really challenges Lymond to be better. But then again, it's from Jarrett's perspective, so it's going back to that, like, can we believe his assessment of Gabriel's motivation when he's so obviously hero worships the guy? So,
I mean, again, Jarrett's not the only one. But...
Right. So do we believe what anybody says about Gabriel? Because they all seem to be in love with this guy. Yeah, I don't know.
So then there's another really interesting exchange in here where Lymond suggests that they should not wear their 100 pounds of plate metal in the sweltering heat of Malta, which I can speak to. It's really, really hot. I would not wear 100 pounds of plate metal in the heat. And Gabriel's response is, this very intense response where he ends up saying, you know, we here on this fragment of rock are the shield of Christianity, of culture, of humanity, of all the great arts for which men have died. Think of that and don't despise us. We are not simpletons. Breathing quickly, Graham Mallet suddenly stopped. Sweat beating the fair skin sparkled in the lamplight, and below his eyes, clear as seawater, dark shadows remained from the stress of the day. Do you not think that I am human too? Do you think my vows are simple to keep?
And it's like, he didn't say that. Like, he didn't say any of that.
So, like, all he said was, like, maybe you shouldn't wear 100 pounds of plate armor in the heat.
And a really obvious tunic that points you, like, it's like X marks the spot where you should shoot, you know? like maybe just wear regular pants and a shirt like everyone else. And, you know,
You can probably tell from the way I read that I find this book really, really funny.
over the top. And yeah, so and then he says and then he apologizes, like, I've embarrassed you and myself. And it's like, really? He embarrassed Lymond? Like, I don't think so. I don't know, maybe.
Like, what? Yeah, he creates this idea that Lymond did something wrong because he says he embarrassed Lymond, and then later he's talking to Jared and he's like apologizing, and he's for Lymond. He says, "Don't be hard on him. He is young and he's been embarrassed quite enough." And it's like,
I'm like,
what did Lymond do wrong? Like, Gabriel's denying it, but
he didn't do anything embarrassing at all. And this, okay, so then we're back to Shady. Okay, so we're back to Shady because he's like, Jared, you seem to know of some wish he had to reach Gozo. Don't tell me why, which is kind of obviously like, come on, tell me why. But, said the great Graham Mallet, making a quick rueful face and holding up in 2 fingers a folded fragment of paper, torn and dirty with much handling. So then he goes on to like this note from Una came, and he had to read it. Like, oh, like, unfortunately I was forced to read it because it didn't have like the name got torn off, and it's just like shady. Like, I do not believe this. So I forget already all it contains. Like,
no, he doesn't.
Don't.
But it could be a totally pure, like, he wants to protect Lymond. He really wants to convert Lymond to be one of the knights. He wants to inspire him to be better. Could be.
I do not think so.
I like that we actually get to read the note for once.
Yeah.
As opposed to have it referenced later in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder if she knows that the attack is coming when she sends that note. Because if she does or she doesn't, it's different. If she doesn't know, he's still totally justified in trying to save her. If she does know and she's still saying go away, maybe she should just go away.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also like, if she doesn't know an attack is coming, then it's just like, go away is the message. But if she does know an attack is coming, then the messages could be more like, don't risk yourself. Like, it could be a less selfish message. Like, if she knows the attack is coming, it could be like, stay away, meaning don't put yourself in harm.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I do love that. He's like, how did this come to you? The night, let's see, the night told him, Lymond's fair brows rose. For the first time, it occurred to Jarrett that he would be an uncomfortable enemy to make. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, whoa.
Yeah, I love that one.
Whatever expression was on Lymond's face, I really wish I could have seen it.
Don't mess with Lymond's pursuit of a woman he wants to rescue.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I felt bad for the shepherds again. They're like, they didn't see why they should go where the knights wouldn't go to defend the knight's property and die in the knight's place. It's like, yeah. So sad.
So I didn't make any notes on the rest of the chapter. They have the talk about Tripoli and sending those poor kids to Tripoli.
I didn't either, except for the reason we do find out the reason why Durgout has is so determined to besiege this place, which is that it's revenge for the way his brother was treated, and that that he has specific, specific vendetta against the governor.
Yep. Governor of Gozo, where Una is.
For desecrating the body of his brother, which, yeah, not good.
Not good. So, what do you guys think is going to happen, and what is all the setup leading us to?
We're going to have a siege, and it's going to be interesting because I kind of like stuff like that. And of course, Lymond will figure some way out of it, although there may be some death. So
Death
we'll
from
see.
who?
I don't know.
I mean, I definitely think there's going to be a bunch of death.
Yeah. Those poor 200 Calabrians, they're going to Tripoli, so we won't see them for a while, but they're not going to have a good time.
Also, I feel like they've got 15 knights incarcerated because they were rebellious in some ways, so they're going to ship them off to Tripoli. Like, also they were young, which that's kind of sad. Like the young members of your order mess up and you stick them in jail. Like, but anyway, I'm intrigued when you showed the picture of the fort with the way that the fort is built. I'm wondering if we're going to have some sort of like depth of night climbing the walls scene. If there's going to be some sort of like the Turks are climbing the walls from the outside, or they're escaping by climbing down the walls from the, like if there's some, I mean, that's such a dramatic image of that building and there's no windows, and I just wonder if there's going to be something with that.
You're to the first chapter of the first book when Lymond was climbing the walls of Edinburgh Castle.
Oh yeah, that's right. Also like the narrow streets, are we going to have like some chase scene, like kind of reminiscent of maybe the rooftop chase from last book? Are we going to have like dashing through these narrow streets and like fighting hand-to-hand combat in these really narrow spaces? Like I wonder if we'll have some of that. Hopefully we're not going to have like starving to death. Like I hope this is not a long siege where they're like huddled behind walls with their supplies dwindling kind of thing.
Where is this Jarrett, Lymond, Gabriel love triangle going?
Well, I'm assuming Lymond's gonna go to Gozo. So are Jarrett and Gabriel gonna take him over there to the island? Because Gabriel offered, like, I'll take you. So are we gonna end up on that island? Is Dragout gonna like dramatically like behead the governor in some fashion or something? Like I don't know. But
I'd be interested to see if Dragout turns out to be not as bad as everybody makes him seem.
Yeah, which seems like that could happen. Like it seems because we've had multiple mentions of like even the French ambassador saying like these people are more compassionate and tolerant than we are. So.
Yeah, and we've had references to Lymond's possible friendship with Dragout.
Yeah, so that would be cool. I'm also curious, I'm really wondering like what the structure of the rest of this book is, because if we're going to be on Malta the whole time, like this siege is going to be incredibly drawn out. Like this is going to be, we've got like 400 pages. Are we going to be spending like behind citadel walls and all of that? Or is the Malta thing going to be like the next 100 pages and then we're going to go back to Scotland? Because again, like we had a map of Scotland at the beginning of this book and we had no map of Malta. So I feel it just seems odd that we've left Scotland forever for this book. It seems odd. I don't know. Like, is Lymond recruiting? Is his army? Is he going to bring some knights? Are we going to somehow, some people are going to survive this and Lymond's going to bring like 4 or 5 of the knights, like Jarrett and Gabriel, and probably not the Dowager Queen's brother. What's his name?
Francis of Lorraine.
Yeah, Francis of Lorraine or whatever. Yeah, is probably not him, I'm guessing. I guess he's the brother of the Dowager Queen. Maybe bring him back too.
I would tend to agree with you about the whole going back to Scotland thing, because I don't think Jolita is going to come to Malta.
Oh,
anytime
right.
soon. And she's a huge part of the beginning of this book that just is sort of
Oh,
left.
yeah.
They,
Oh, yeah, they gotta go back to Scotland.
they only mention her once in this scene, so.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay, so I bet this is going to be like 50 or 100 pages on Malta, and then we're going to go back to Scotland, because you're right. Jolita's got to become part of this. And unless she somehow makes it back out to Malta, which seems weird.
So there's a printing failure in the new edition of this book. We should ask the publisher, because the old edition, it's falling apart because I took it with me,
Yeah.
has in the section a map of
There.
What?
That would be so nice to have.
What?
Oh, and it shows a
That would have
close-up.
been super nice.
Yeah. So I'll like take a picture of it and send it to you.
Yeah, like
You have the
use
map
the
of Scotland
scanning
too?
app on your phone.
Yeah, it has the map of Scotland at the beginning section, and then it has the map of Malta in this section.
What?
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah,
cheated.
This is all we get.
So sad. So
Yeah.
unfair.
Yeah, I feel cheated. Yeah, scan it or something, and then we can use the map.
That would be
That
great.
would, honestly, it would have been super useful, especially during that like coming into Malta scene where I just had a really hard time picturing the harbor and where the chain was and all of that.
Yeah, it's all on here. It's very tiny, but it's all on here. Because yeah, I took this with me, and I was like looking at the modern maps, and then looking at this, and be like, wait, what was where? Because it's very different. Like I thought the main part would be the part that's in the book, but that's not at all. Like I was literally the only tourist there. I had the whole place to myself. There's an Inquisition museum there, and I had the entire museum to myself.
Wow, that's cool. Nobody expects it, of course.
No, never.
It was a super weird Inquisition museum. Also, it was like the Inquisition wasn't that bad. There were some good reasons why they did it, and like they rehabilitated some people. It was great. Yeah, it was really weird. I'm sorry, side note.
Oh, bizarre. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to finding out if, although this is a bad analogy, it doesn't quite work. I'm looking forward to finding out if Gabriel is Dr. Watson or Moriarty. Like, that's not actually a very good comparison, but yeah, is he going to be sort of a side-by-side character, or is he going to be an antagonist?
We will find out. All right. Any final comments?
Nothing.
Then we'll see you all next time. Thank you for watching and commenting. Bye-bye.
Bye.